Hey y'all, it's Untitled here, and in this Taiji video, we're going to be continuing my series on RShiny, and we're going to focus on reactive variables. So in my first video, I went over, the filtering functions, which add some reactiveness and some dynamicness to your dashboards. But I was basically hard coding most of this stuff. We're using very consistent data sets, and in real life, you're probably going to have, some different variables that are changing whenever you're using the dashboard. So I figured I would make a video on reactive variables or things that basically will be changing while you use the dashboard. I'm going to show you this first bare bones dashboard where it's the reactive variables dashboard. And it shows a generic pairwise plot that's kind of useful for exploratory analysis of the iris dataset. So one of the things that we want to kind of think about is, if we have a dashboard maybe for EDAs, we would want someone to basically like upload a data set and basically have that plot come out. Oops, that's a little scraper schedule that I have at 12 p.m. But we would probably want to like upload a file, and then that file would go into this little plot right here. And what we know is that with GG Duo or the GG Ally package, it's just a simple function to call, but we need to replace this data set with a data set that we want to basically choose. Okay. So one of the things that we would think about probably is like, oh, we'll just do like a read dot, CSV file name.csv, and we'll just select the file name and it'll read it in. But it's not that simple, unfortunately. What we need to realize though is that RShiny is expecting kind of like a consistent variable, unless if we specify that it's actually changing. So in this case, what we'd probably want to do is actually add like a file, like an upload file button. So we can actually do that by using the file input, and we'll call this the V. We'll call it V file input, and our label will be say like upload file. We can run that, and I'll show you this little thing right here where you can browse and select the file. In this case, I actually have the iris dataset right here, so you can just upload it right there. And it's pretty slick with a nice little UI. That being said, we have this v-file input, and I think we could try to do a input v-file input and see if it actually works, right? So as you can see, we already have an error, but if we upload it, it'll actually upload this stuff. But we can see that there's a lot of weird stuff going on because it's actually using this file input as essentially this metadata for what we're trying to upload, right? So we're not seeing the actual species or the sepal links. We're kind of seeing the name of the file, the size, the type, and the data path. It's not something we really want to plot out. Instead, what we actually have to do is kind of like parse the actual file data. And this will actually be helpful because we're actually going to create a reactive variable. In this case, we're going to create our reactive variable in the server because it'll be in our back end. So what I'll call it is file data. And then what we can do is use the reactive function. And in this case, we'll have our file, and it'll be our input v file input. And what we can kind of do is also add a little helper. So we'll say like if it's not missing file, right? Then we can just kind of read the file. In this case, since we're passing in the file input, so when we select it, what we want to pass is the actual file, the data path. Because when you're actually using the file input, it's basically passing in metadata, and then you want to pass that metadata into some type of reading function. In this case, it's called a data path. And now what we can actually do is pass this in right here, right? But if we actually see, it's going to cause us a little error, right? So it's saying argument of length 0. And one thing that we have to realize when we're using these reactive functions is we always have to kind of wrap it as a function. So we're basically calling the file data function and using that file. So we can go right there. We can go right here. and it'll show us the iris data set being plotted out. Now, you might be wondering, if we actually run this app again, we get this weird little error message. So what we can actually do is we can we can also have like a request. We can do a requirement, and that should basically do it for right there. So right there, see, there's no error. It's just a blank box. When we upload it, it'll pop up. So that's a way where we can make it a little bit cleaner, and that way it won't cause us little errors when we open and show the user the actual dashboard. Cool. So right there, that's basically what we really want to kind of focus on is when we have reactive variables, such as like a variable that's going to be changing, it's not going to be implicit in the actual app. We always want to make it basically reactive. And then when we use a reactive variable, we also have to call it as a function. And then we can also use this request function with it to basically kind of handle all the errors that we want to parse out. Okay. So when I'm looking at this, one thing that we kind of want to do is, what if we want to actually like interact with the file with like filtering, right? And that would be pretty useful, especially if we're going to do like maybe like a simple modeling thing. So let's actually start doing that. So one thing that we can do is basically say like, let's just assume that we want to like create some type of, logistic regression model or some linear model. Let's just do a linear model. And we'll just say that, when we upload a file, right, with the iris dataset, we can do a basic EDA, and then we can say, oh, well, let's predict like sepal length, right, with this file, since we have our little explain our brief EDA chart. So let's actually do that with a basic selector. So this selector will basically cause whatever, it'll basically specify what we want to predict. And in this case, what we would want to do is probably create a select input. But with our select inputs and having a reactive variable, since our select input is going to be dependent on what file we upload, we're actually going to use a little trick and call it the UI output, or what's it called? UI output. Oh, that's why UI output, and we're just going to call this like the target variable. And what a UI output is basically kind of like a helper function for basically creating any type of UI. Right. So if we have a UI, we also have to have a output for the UI. So we'll just say output. And we call this what? Target var, target variable. And we'll just do a render UI. And in this case, what we can do is we can still request our file data. And we can do our select input. So our select input, again, if we remember from our previous video, is like the little drop down. So we can kind of select a column that we want to choose as our thing that we want to predict. In this case, we're going to call it vTarget. And then we'll say target variable. And our choices will be the column names for our file data. Right? So basically, we're saying like once you upload a file, we can start using it. And then we can say like our choices for what we want to predict will be the features or columns from that data frame or our Excel file. So let's do that. We uploaded a file. And now we can see our target variable pops up right here. Obviously, it's not going to do anything because we haven't done anything yet with it, but it is still extremely kind of cool, right? Took about 1 minute to put into, and we can start, thinking about what we want to do with it. And obviously, with a simple example, we would probably want to create a model that would basically predict the sepal length. So when we're trying to do that, what we can do basically is we can think about how we're going to do it, which will be a simple like lm target var. Our data will equal to our file data, right? So let's actually do that. And in this case, since we have a linear model, we might want to do it for like inference or something like that. So what I can type in is just create a simple like a model diagnostics plot, right? So it's kind of something where you would do it like in Excel, with like the data analysis, run the LM, view the coefficients, and maybe analyze the residuals. But we'll just do a model plot. We'll do a model plot, and then we'll say, sorry, render plot. We can put this thing basically in there, our target variable, and we'll just use the like broom package to tidy it. And then, and then what we can do is just kind of plot out the coefficient. So x equals like term, y equals estimate, color. Maybe we'll just say equals p dot value is less than equal to 0.5. And then maybe do a segment that equals term, yn equals 0, and a GM point. And I'm just going to do a little formatting just because I know, like, I'm basically trying to plot out each coefficient's name and the variable, the coefficient value, color it, whether it's statistically significant or not, as a basic lollipop. So I've done a decent amount of lollipops. So I'll just do hs equals 1. And then I'll say labs title is equal to, title is like coefficients, uh, coefficients, right? So let's actually try this out. Oh, actually, I need to render this plot out. So I'll put this right there. Plot output, and we'll do a model output. Let's see if it works. Iris. And you can see how target variable is not found because when we're specifying this target variable, it's kind of pasting it as an actual string. And what that means basically is that we need to basically paste it as a formula. So what we can do is, I'll just show you input target var. Actually, I'll just show you input v target. Sorry about that, because the target var is actually the UI, but the v target is that. I can show you that it'll still cause an error. Maybe it won't. Yeah, it'll still call it because it's saying like variable lengths differ found for sepal.length. Even if we change it to like petal length, it's still not going to do it. Because what we want to do is paste it as a formula. So input v target and do that. And then what we can do is as dot formula as that formula. Okay. Cool. Right. So if we do that, browser formula, we still have that error. But let's see if it actually doesn't. And we can see how it runs the model. We can kind of change it. You can see how it's changing. Obviously, if you do species, it's going to cause an error. So maybe if I wanted to make it a little bit cleaner, and maybe focus just on regression problems, we would say like select if is dot numeric. So let me actually do that right here. File data, choices, file data, select if is dot numeric. Cool. Right, so let's run that. You can put this in. Oops, what is it? What's going on here? Select if is dot numeric, choices, file data. Let's see your column names. I want to make sure if I iris select if is dot numeric. Oh, maybe that'll work. Let's see if that'll actually work. Yep, there you go. So I must have just spelled something wrong, but we can see how we can change the target variable and it still works. Cool. But if you think about it, we don't really want to render this. We don't want to train this model every time we change that variable. We might want to do some analysis first for the um, um, we might want to add some type of functionality where we want to like look at specific variables, maybe run some t-tests, do some hypothesis testing, either, and then start creating our models, maybe do a little bit bigger EDAs. So one of the things that we kind of want to think about is that, hey, it'd be kind of useful, right, if we had like a button to basically execute the model once we kind of figure out what we want to do. Okay. Again, that's pretty straightforward because R has the what's the action, action button, so we can do that. Action button. Our input ID will be like, I don't know, V button, and we'll just call this run model. Yep. And now what we can do is think about when we want to run the model. And since this button is essentially a reactive variable where when we press it, it will cause an action, right? It's called an actually event button or event reactive function. So what we can think about is let's actually create our like output like model. We'll call it like model run. It's not an output since it's the same thing as a reactive function. And realistically, I should probably put it right there. And we can say event reactive. Okay. And then with our input, with our event reactive, we kind of have to pass in our button that we want to specify the that'll be kind of watching for the event. So for the event reactive, we could have tons of buttons. We just need to specify the button that we want to use. In this case, it'll be just input v button. Okay. Add a comma, and now we have this. And now when we want to run the model, we can actually pass this in. Either model run. And now if you think about it, since this model run is essentially the same thing as this file data, they're both data frames that are just going to be running on a specific action or event. So with file data, we're going to generate a data frame once we upload a file. The model run will actually be dependent on the file data, but when we press the button, it'll run a linear model on whatever target variable we sent it from our filters. So what we can do now is we can kind of just use the model run and run that. So once we push the execute the model, then we'll generate a model run or a linear model with its tidied coefficients, and then we can pass that in to our model plot. Okay, so let's look up the iris, and then what we can do is petal length, run the model, and we have it. Another thing that we could actually think about is that, hey, well, since we have this v target, maybe we should make this a little bit more reactive so we actually know what we're talking about. So we can say coefficients for predicting, and we can say like input v target, and we'll just say a little subtitle. We'll say using a linear model. And let's actually do that. Okay, we have our iris. All right, it's uploading. We'll predict petal length. We'll run the model. Coefficients for predicting petal length using a linear model. And then right there, we have this basic thing where we're creating, just an interactive linear model thing. We can change it obviously to like sepal length and then run that, stuff like that. So as you can see, right, it is kind of a little weird where if we change the target variable and we don't run it, we might have to execute it. But again, it's probably something where you kind of think about like, okay, maybe the select input will change with the render plot. So that might cause some issues. But again, it's something where you kind of can work around or build something of a higher, like, you could build a little bit more logic and more infrastructure around it. Okay. So one of the things that we kind of have to think about is, okay, so let's say that we have this dashboard. We give it to some, like maybe like a student who wants to kind of just like, oh, okay, I don't want to do any coding. Just want to run some linear models. You're like an econ student or something. We want to look at my coefficients, look at the p-values, and just save them, write a report, or dive deeper, or send it to like a colleague or something like that. So that type of thing right there is something we'd probably want to just like download the results of the model, and just like email it to someone, right? Or I don't know, like send it on Teams. So what we can do is we can actually create a download button, right? So let's do a download button. And right there, we have a download button. We'll call it v download. And we'll say download model. I'll just download summary, right? We'll just say download summary. And one of the things that's kind of odd about exporting models, exporting as the download button, is that you actually have to use this kind of like download handler function. And I think it's a little bit odd, to be honest, but it's something where they basically create a file name function, they paste it or whatever, and then their content, it just writes it out. So what I always do is I just kind of copy it, and then I'll just paste it underneath the file input. In this case, since it's saying download data, we're gonna replace it with v download. And then what we want to actually write, right, is our model run. Cool. So again, we have that. One of the things I found, which is a little bit odd with the download button, is that it doesn't center right on the actual sidebar. I'm not sure why, to be honest, but we can quick download. We can see a picture of my face. And then what we can do is kind of like save it as like model summary.csv. We can exit out, and then if we go back there, we see our model summary, hopefully. All right, so we can see our model summaries right there. Obviously, what we can do with some changes is, since I don't actually like the write.csv, I'll try to do a write_csv, right? So that way it's a little bit cleaner. Additionally, what we might think about is, hey, maybe we want them to perhaps put in a file name. So we can just say text input. We'll say v file name, label equals file name, equals that. And we can also add a placeholder. So we'll say model results.csv, right? Add a little comma to that. And now what we can do is basically say, we can just paste paste that, and call that a day right there. So right, so model results.csv. We can go to, what is it, Tidy Tuesday, season 2, apps, Shiny Reactive, Iris, right? Let's target pedal width, run model. Default is model results. Oh, oops. What did I input? Paste. What? Paste. Oh, what the hell? I just said. Paste file name. Maybe I can just file name. It should be content. File name input. Maybe I can do a .csv and then sep equals that, and then maybe I'll do a model results. The file name, yeah. Okay, let's see if that worked. But again, I don't think it's really that big of a deal to specify or not specify a file name. So let's run this. We'll just run that. File name, model results. Does that do that? Okay, well, I guess it doesn't. I want to do one more try with this. Just set file name. I'll say model results. One last try. If it doesn't work, I am not going to lose sleep over it. Season 2 apps and reactive. Okay, yep. So now we have model results right there. Okay, and then you can just save it as is. And then I can just replace that. I'm actually not going to do that right there. So yeah, so you can just put it right there and right there. Cool. So let's actually look at the final model. Final dashboard. Just upload a little thing right there. Sorry, I've kind of gone through the same kind of process for uploading the file and figuring that out. But again, pretty cool. We can run it right down the summary, have our model results right there, and it's good to go. So as you can see, the dashboard is pretty easy to create, especially when you're using reactive variables. At the end of the day, one of the things that's a little bit more confusing is the file inputs and file outputs. Just because it's not directly uploading the file as a data frame when we're thinking about read.csv or read_csv. Instead, it's kind of passing in metadata, and then you have to pass that metadata into your actual reading function. Same thing with the output function. It's kind of just writing it out, and you have to have a little file name function using the down handler. But other than that, one of the things we just have to realize is that when we're uploading things or using variables that are changing throughout the dashboard, it's always something to consider using a reactive variable. And then with reactive variables, you always kind of have to use these reactive variables as almost functions instead, but they essentially do the same thing. Secondly, again, with the reactive functions, they're pretty straightforward. You just kind of have to understand, event reactive is when you're doing something that'll cause something to change, and then your reactive is, basically the process of the action that's causing the change. So, event reactive is the actual event. Reactive is the actual variable that's caused by an event. So I hope you liked this week's Title Tuesday video on RShiny. I think, again, these things are a little bit complicated, but they really elevate your Shiny development skills. And for my last video on RShiny, we're going to be going over basically how to optimize the speed of dashboards. So once you have a fully working dashboard, running basically diagnostics on, which plots are taking the most time to load. How can we speed up our dashboard using like feather files, parallel processing, and stuff like that. So with that being said, I'll see you guys next time and tidy on.